Hello and welcome to the Building Podcast. Today we're exploring how the world is changing with the younger generation and the ways that we as employers, mentors and supporters of our new recruits may need to change our approach. We're really lucky to have Polly Harrow with us here today to take us through the challenge and the opportunities of employing young talent from schools, colleges and universities. Polly is the Assistant Principal of Kirklees College in Huddersfield. But really importantly for today's conversation, she's the FE Student Support Champion appointed by the Department of Education. An ideal person with a font of wisdom to take us through this topic, which is critical for the success of our sector. Polly, good morning and welcome to the Building Podcast.
Good morning and thank you for such a generous introduction. I hope I can live up to that. But good morning. Thanks for having me.
I know you'll have no problem living up to that. We've heard you speak, and I think I'm really looking forward to it because I think there's so much we need to draw out to explain to employers some of the changing environment that we're working in. But look, we normally start with allowing you to say a little bit about yourself because it allows listeners to sort of understand where you're coming from and the experience you can bring to the conversation.
Okay, well, so I think to sum it up fairly briefly, I've been working in education now for around 30 years and in the post-16 sector. And I think the work that I've been primarily involved with over the last decade really has been to take a trauma-informed, restorative and inclusive approach to education, recognising that we do need to change the way that we deliver our service, and education is delivery of a service. So I am a national practitioner in trauma-informed education and I'm a restorative practitioner. And so, and I think sometimes now I'm very pleased to say that this has gained enormous traction and energy across the FE sector. And I spend most of my time talking to colleges and to college staff and senior leadership teams about how to implement this kind of approach. But I think sometimes these words can be a bit off-putting. This terminology can actually switch people off. So I hope to explain a little bit better as we go through this interview how essential maybe a shift in our attitudes is.
Super. Well, Polly, I think I'm not interviewing you for anything at all. I mean, it's a conversation to explain where we need to be going. I think first of all,
yes.
Our chat. I think the first thing to perhaps explain is the word trauma, because within construction, trauma means a major accident and somebody's lost a limb. But I know from the FE sector, trauma now has a different connotations, which I think probably needs, particularly on this age of COVID, I think you perhaps ought to explain to listeners.
That's absolutely fine. So yes, so trauma within the kind of so the science behind this and the research that has been done looks at trauma as the impact of an event, and so you might have trauma, as you say, like a major accident. But trauma can also be sustained and repeated neglect or abuse or violence, in particular domestic violence. It can be poverty. So it's not actually the event itself, it's the impact on the individual. And when we underestimate the impact on the individual and we don't understand what trauma does to the body and the brain and learning and how it impacts on behaviour, then we miss the opportunities to support the healing of that trauma and to ensure that we don't re-trigger that trauma with our language and our body language, our own behaviour. So it's really about employers and educators role modelling in a very respectful, humane way. And this is, I think, something that's particularly important in this chat that we're going to have about understanding the damage that can be done with workplace banter, casual racism, casual sexism, which can trigger underlying trauma. So the NHS have adopted a trauma-informed approach, which is shifting from saying what is wrong with you to what has happened to you and how do we understand, excuse me, that your behaviour is communicating a need. And I think that's what this approach really is all about, is understanding that we need to be curious about what lies behind behaviour, because whatever the behaviour is communicating a need. And if we take the behaviour at face value and we say that's bad behaviour, so you're a bad person, we never get to the curiosity of actually trying to resolve the need that's leading to the behaviour that's perhaps unwanted. And I just want to put a quick caveat in there that when it comes to health and safety, there are things that just cannot be tolerated because they are risky and because they are dangerous. And that's part of this as well. That's completely understood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there are boundaries on everything. And some of those boundaries on health and safety are a much shorter tenure than then some of the boundaries on dealing with some of the trauma, as you describe it, of people coming in and behaviour that is inappropriate. So, and I'm very pleased that you recognise that. But let's, and there's a huge amount to unpack there, Polly. But I would suggest we sort of start with how we've seen students change over the last few years, because they've had the impact of COVID on them, which has been a major impact, disproportionately affecting our younger people. So perhaps a sort of quick explanation of why this is becoming so much more important and relevant to us today.
Well, I think you're absolutely right in saying that the disproportionate impact, but then within that, there's disproportionate impact on certain young people of certain backgrounds, young people with special educational needs, young people living in poverty or in deprivation. So we need to really, it's almost like we need to wake up and realise that what went pre-COVID has gone. And when we look back, and I've talked to a number of people who work with apprentices in construction before we meeting you to have this discussion today. So I'm drawing on other voices and other discussions that I've had. But one thing that was described to me, sorry, because I'm still slightly fluey, was that it's almost an old-fashioned approach now to students being able to, potential apprentices being able to contact employers themselves, meeting in person, having face-to-face interactions. There seems to be a feeling that young people were more aware previously that they really need to make a good impression, and that's going to be an in-person, face-to-face interaction. But post-COVID, so much has remained online. We've found new ways of working, and indeed, in some ways, more effective and more efficient ways of working. So there's much less face-to-face interaction. You know, applications now are using chatbots. You're not speaking to an actual person, or artificial intelligence and automated responses. And so school leavers seem much less prepared than they used to be, but they used to be prepared in a different way. And I think that move to online and that distancing from actual human interaction and connection is something that that is a real challenge. And I would say that we do need to recognise in so many cases, and we've all got examples, there seems to be almost an inability to engage outside the mobile phone. You know, even friendship groups are mobile phone based. And we know from employers that they're not happy about the fact that students haven't got the skills in personal development. And we completely understand that. But we need to work together to support the development of personal and social attitudes and behaviours in our young people. So I would say, the big headline for me is employers, you are invited and encouraged to work with college staff about expectations on both sides, because I think we need to support employers in being more understanding of new starting points in relation to personal development. And can I just give you a quick example,
Of
Mark? Is
course,
that
yeah,
okay? So last year, in an area not far from where I am now, there was a working group set up with the college and the university and employers discussing what skills are required through apprenticeship programs. And every employer who attended that working group cited school leavers going for interviews not functioning as expected.
yeah.
And then in employment, an issue with arriving on time. This attitude of young people that they could take a day off if they didn't feel
Mhm.
like it, a lack of social skills and actually a fundamental lack of common sense. And the employers were definitely expressing that this was becoming a bigger and bigger problem
Mhm.
for them. But and I would say we need to work on that together. So there's an expectation that colleges should be solving the problem. And we need to understand the limitations on colleges in terms of funding, delivering apprenticeship standards and vocational programs and fitting in, the working as well as the learning. And we need much more joined up approaches with schools and colleges and employers to work together.
Mm. I mean, I think it's fascinating that it's working both ways, isn't it? So we've got a problem. The students and young people have been put into a very unusual situation, and for having been working from home and not being exposed to a lot of these social or opportunities to learn socially. And we as employers are now going the other way, and we're making it much more difficult to engage with a person to people to people approach that is only exacerbating the problem. And one of my simple questions was going to be, I've had daughters just finishing university since COVID, and they make all these applications to companies, and they never hear anything from anybody except for, as you say, for an automated response saying thanks, but no thanks. And it's soul destroying. You get 30, 40 rejections like that without any sort of competent feedback. And you're just turning people off the jobs market as far as I can see.
Well, absolutely. I mean, we do find, I think in general, and I am speaking in generalizations here, but I work right across the FE sector all the time, and I'm in
Mhm.
every geographical area in this country, visiting colleges. And I think overall, we have seen larger organisations are more generally willing to engage if they've got the infrastructure and the resources that smaller
Mhm.
organisations sometimes don't have. But larger organisations are also much more difficult to penetrate, and you have this automated system where we're starting to say, go in, be seen, input.
Mm.
How can we navigate this online, all of these online barriers which prevent you from actually speaking to a human being? And I think in reference to what you've just said, Mark, we've got to remember if we look at our high areas of higher deprivation, we've got young people who are sometimes from a second or third generation of unemployment.
Mm.
And it's difficult sometimes to communicate the value of work if they don't get the support at home. It could be digital support or educational support or
Yeah.
emotional support. They aren't always encouraged in that way. So when we do get them to the application stage, and then they get a rejection, it's not going to take much for them to be completely switched off, is it?
Mm. No. And I mean, I think with the other thing we ought to just remind listeners is that actually there's a shortage of young people anyway coming through for everybody's requirements. I know from construction we've got hundreds of thousands of people we need to engage uh, to find to be able to deliver the services we need to. Within the energy sector, we've got the similar problem. We're going to get a green grid and net zero. We need we need thousands, hundreds of thousands of people to come and help us support this target and this goal. And we're going to need a lot of the young people coming through the sections through education at the moment to come and join us. And so understanding these limitations and understanding how we can best engage them is absolutely fundamental to the success of any of all our sectors. So getting this right is really rather important. I mean, do you want to say a little bit about employer engagement in colleges? Because I know Ofsted now encourages that employer engagement. And certainly, you came to Malton and talked about some of the changes we had to put through there. And I know Malton is making huge strides in trying to bring employers into the college to meet youngsters. I know there's always some concern from employers about, how am I putting myself at risk by meeting these young people because I'm out of my depth. I don't really know what's going on.
Mm.
I know the world of safeguarding has moved on enormously, and I'm not aware of it. I mean, is it something that employers need to be wary about, or is that something you can tell us that actually there's no danger coming in because you'll always be supervised and there's opportunities to come and impart your wisdom into the students' voice that they're there?
Yeah, I think I really do understand that point, and I understand the wariness, and it can feel overwhelming when you're an actual expert in it. So it's going to be a bit overwhelming for people who are on the periphery, as it were. But I've been to colleges where they've held employer engagement events where no employers have turned up. I've been in colleges where employers have been offered completely free training, real quality training on any number of areas, including safeguarding, and not one employer on their provider list has taken them up on that offer. So there is something here about what is happening with employers, that they are reluctant and they are wary. And I've got a great example at Luminate College in Leeds. They've created an employer induction program. Now, what engagement they'll get with that remains to be seen because it is brand new, but it's a fantastic idea of getting the employer in and really talking to them about how they can support social and emotional mental health, how to access college services for expert support, how to talk to the college and connect with the college around safeguarding and well-being, but also how you get the best out of your workers in today's world.
Yeah.
And I think this wariness that we have is only going to remain until employers properly connect strongly with colleges. Come and talk to us. We'll come and talk to you. Let's have the conversation about what you're wary about, what you're concerned about, and be patient. We are at different starting points with our young people now. They've had a very different experience at school from the experience any of us are used to, and we've got to be prepared for that. These are very different times, and my concern is that we've got so many really talented young people with such valuable skills that they're not getting the opportunity to engage with employment in the way that we would like, because of this reluctance on behalf of the employer about what they're going to be taking on. But actually, that we can really, really assist. Firstly, we're not going to deliver the skills agenda without colleges.
No.
Colleges are essential to creating the workforce of the future. So not really engaging with us and talking with us in real, honest, open, common sense conversations is just a bit, it's a bit extraordinary, really. And I think there's some myths going on. I don't know what the blockage is, but that wariness that you refer to, Mark, we can reassure you, but you need to talk to us about how you can support apprentices effectively, work with colleges collaboratively. And can I just add quickly that we all know, this is the irony of it, it's really difficult to get really good staff in colleges in construction and engineering trades. We know
Indeed,
that.
yes.
Okay. So employers need to be tolerant and know that sometimes we have a churn of staff and sometimes we don't have the staff we need. but come and talk to us. Sometimes you employers have better contacts than us as colleges.
Mm.
And employers, we find across the sector, sometimes jump from college to college the minute that they say, well, you haven't had a teacher for 4 weeks, or this has happened, or that's happened, or they give up on an apprentice very, very quickly. There can be, and I'm talking very generally
Generalization. Yeah,
here,
no, I'm
um,
well aware. Yes.
but there can be a quick call to judgment and no allowing for the learning and making mistakes, not dangerous mistakes, but
Mm.
understandable mistakes. I think that we can reassure employers, but employers currently, it's not been this bad, I'm going to say, this
Challenging.
concerning and challenging as it is now. But employers seem to value colleges less than they have done previously and engage with colleges less
Mm.
currently. And that is a real dilemma because it's colleges that are going to deliver on this on the skills agenda and like I say, prepare the workforce for the future. So we've got to get over these hurdles and these
Yeah.
barriers between us.
So, I mean, I really like the idea of an employer induction program for FE because I can see trade federations like the National Federation of Builders or Solar Energy UK for in the solar sector creating that induction program to educate their employers and their members to explain this is how you engage and this is the opportunity that colleges can provide in bringing young people forward. I mean, I'm always, I'm every time I go around the college at Moulton, we've got some fabulous recruits out there that are going to really grace any employer, and take them into the next level. And just getting that exposure, I think, is so important. And that positive opportunity is just, it's there for the taking, which, as you say, we've got to get people into the colleges to make them comfortable that can happen. Okay, note to self. Going to go and sort that one out and see what we can do.
Right. But funnily enough, Mark, I was going to ask you, why do you think that employers currently don't seem to see the value of further education colleges?
I think it's partly to do with the pressures on businesses at the moment. We are, and certainly you look at the construction industry at the moment, it is tightening. There's new legislation coming through we need to get a grip with. There's new skills and challenges. The goalposts are moving. And recruitment is one of those things that can always put back a week or two, and suddenly it slipped a month or a year, and you haven't done anything about it. And then you've lost contact with your college, you don't know how things are happening and what's moving on. And I think it's exacerbated by the FE sector being always a Cinderella part of education. We're always in FE struggling for every penny we can find and eke out. And I think it makes engagement more difficult. And it also means that we are focusing on the hard skills that are required within our, if we take any of the traditional trades that we're offering, they focus on the hard skills rather than some of the soft skills, which are so fundamentally important to employers. And so, if the people coming through are less attractive or need more work doing, then perhaps we have to look elsewhere and think we're going to get somewhere else where there's less incentive to get involved. I think
Do
it's
you,
it's it's a
sorry.
difficult problem.
Do you think, Mark, and this is my last question to you for the moment, um, do you think that employers tend to see the apprenticeship program as quite onerous? Is it not an attractive proposition to take on an apprentice? Is it easier to go and just employ someone directly?
So the answer is it depends on the employer.
Mm.
So there are a great number of employers who take on apprentices who see them as the way of molding people to give the quality of service that their customers required. They fit into the company, and they can take a young person with some skills and enthusiasm and ideas and create a model employee, if you like, that will fit within their organization. There are some who are see the cost of apprenticeships, but not necessarily the benefits, and we'll focus on trying to go and pinch somebody else's pre-trained employees. And so that's, it is, for me, it comes down to sort of how do you present the service you're providing your customers and what's the culture within your organization. So, and both apply, I'm afraid.
Because I've recently been given a couple of case studies where apprentices from a couple of colleges and a number of apprentices have has secured fantastic employment and doing incredibly well in college. And the employer has said, don't bother going to college, we'll just employ you now, and have taken them away from the apprenticeship route and given them jobs. Which is great because the young people want the money and they've got their job, and that's fantastic, but they're not learning and they're not going to get that skill development. And I just want to raise that because over the last 6 months, that's been raised with me as a real concern for colleges.
It is, and at Malton we have the same challenge. I mean, I desperately tell our students that you've done level 2, please, please, please stay for level 3. I know the industry is desperate to employ you, but if you want a career, you need the skills, you need the background training to start and to get there. You're absolutely right. That's absolutely crucial for people, young people, to get that formal training that's going to see them through a career rather than through just a job. But it's in an industry that is desperately short of people. Finding somebody who's a youngster who's prepared to just come and get on with stuff is a very attractive proposition. What we have to do is we have to try and encourage those people to get, to take them through and allow them to finish their apprenticeships and get fully qualified. And I recognise the challenge, but I can see from an employer perspective, you need people to do a job you've just got, and sometimes the only people you can get are taking those students out of college and paying them, good money to finish off the jobs that you've got.
But you can see, can't you, how that then that curtails the development to actually take those higher level skilled jobs. And I think the other thing I wanted to just going back to our initial point about what's changed with young people. The other thing that the sense that I'm really getting from colleges is that apprentices find the expectations of employers, it's quite a huge shock. And it was described to me as a huge shock. So I think on both sides, we've kind of got this impasse almost, haven't we, where employers are wary. If they do find an apprentice who an apprentice who does have those skills of punctuality and communication and common sense, and they snap them up. Whilst obviously that, like I say, curtails their ability to carry on with their learning and skill development. And then on the other side, we've got young people who are really surprised that they're expected to go every day and on time and be able to actually work in a team and so on and so on. So there is, in order to address this really, and I know I'm repeating myself here, this has got to be a collaborative approach with schools and colleges and employers and indeed universities, to really make sure that everybody is really clear about expectations and about tolerance and about learning, because these are trainee adults as well as trainee apprentices, and we can't expect everybody to be ready off the shelf, ready on day one. We're going to need patience and resource investment from all areas.
So I mean, Polly, that's fascinating, because I think we've always had that ability to take trainee adults into the industries that we've been working in. I think what's happened now is that the gap between what we're now being asked to take on board, and again, we're both generalizing massively here.
Yes.
is that there's a larger gap between what is acceptable behavior on site, or within the office, or within the working environment, compared to what we had. And I'm going to say pre-COVID, because I think COVID has been a massive change
Absolutely.
on everybody. And funny enough, construction's the one industry that just carried on regardless. And so those of us that have been lucky enough to work in construction may not have been affected by COVID in our working lives at all. We were just carrying on, but we've had to make efficiencies like, you know, automated recruitment and things like that. And where we don't have to meet people, we put that automation in. So I think it is, we have to find a way of bridging that gap. And
Mm,
it's that team, it's working within those teams, which is what we're so good, which is so important within construction.
mm,
But also within the project environment, it's very difficult just to lose somebody for a day,
mm,
because you've got this iterative process where if you haven't finished your job of, you know, plastering a room or whatever it is, then the decorator can't work when their plans come in on. And just because your plasterer has just taken the day off because they didn't feel like coming in means
mm,
the knock-on effects are massive.
mm,
And so,
mm,
and trying to get that recognition through to young people is a challenge. And
mm,
I know on a great many of the sites I've been looking after, trying to get mobile usage banned so that we
mm,
get people focusing on the job, another problem. But
mm.
that's how people communicate. That's how people look after their very important social lives and also their professional lives. And it's trying to understand that we have to give something in terms of give and make allowances that we may not have had to have made before.
I think that's absolutely right, Mark. And I mean, you only have to, I mean, I'm not going to go off too much on a tangent, but in fact, I won't. But, when I listen to the radio, even in the past 2 weeks, I'm listening to so many people talk about the very, very different society that we live in now and the mobile phone dependent society and the internet dependent society, or social media society, I should say. And we do need to shift. I mean, we've said this already in this
Mm.
discussion, but there is a point at which you've got, like we say, with these kind of working in silos. And I'm just wondering, another question that I would want to pose to somebody, so I'll pose it to you, is do you think the apprenticeship route is written effectively at the moment? Do you think it should change? This idea that you would go to work and then go into college one day a week has the same disruption as you've suggested for taking the day off if you're in the
Yeah.
middle of a job. And we know that many apprentices have said, I can't come to college because I'm on a job and they can't spare me, so I can't come to college this week. So it seems to me that maybe do we need to go back to the drawing board and actually create something? I've got a wand now that I'm waving.
Oh, if
Um,
you're going to want, anything's
you
possible.
know, well, is it, or that I know some employers say, yes, go to college for 6 weeks and then work for 6 weeks, and then we know where we are and we can actually get more done. And is that the preferred model? Do we need to change the methodology of how we're approaching this?
I mean, I think in many respects, education is struggling to be fit for purpose in the way, and whether that's the employer that's got to change or education's got to change, I think we do need some fairly significant reviews about how we go about life, because as you've already alluded to, the expectation on both sides seems to be failing. I mean, I think in terms of apprenticeships per se, I think it is still the gold standard that that industry appreciates.
Mm,
There are employers that like block release, there are employers that like day release, but I think it's the ability to plan around that
mm,
is what allows us to make that work.
mm,
Um, I suspect with the advent of modern technology, there's going to be other ways of delivering that education, that training that perhaps we ought to be looking at and be alive to. But I'm very wary about reducing the quality of the training down, given the changes that we've got in technology and changes in materials, change in working practices. There's a sound, and I hesitate to call it academic, but a sound practical training course will provide anybody for a lifetime in their chosen career. And indeed, I've just been chairing the Solar Task Force Skills Group, and we've got ex-apprentices on there now running very large businesses who are saying that the training they had as an apprentice was an absolute, the only way they were going to succeed in their businesses was because of the quality and the caliber of training they had in those programs. So um, I'm very keen that we maintain the quality of education and extension of that, the quality of student experience through those training programs. So I think it requires a review and probably another 10 podcasts to work that one through, I'm afraid, Polly, but that's that's
Well,
where we
I'll
get
leave you
to.
with that to resolve, Mark.
Lovely. Thank you. I love a few challenges. Polly, I'm wary of time, and I've got two areas I wanted to explore with you. One is the notion of boundaries, because we're talking about kindness, we're talking about awareness, we're talking about going the extra mile to understand how we can get the best out of our students.
Mm.
But that doesn't mean that we're going to abandon the boundaries that we actually started the conversation with. So I wonder if you'd like to say a word or two on how we impose boundaries on people who are, may not be aware of some of the challenges we have as employers. What's the best way of going around about setting those boundaries and enforcing them?
Well, I think one of at Kirklees College, one of our college values is kindness, and it's a really important core value for us. And there's a number of caveats underneath that are explicit about what kindness might mean. But a lot of people think of kindness as being weak, and they think it's being soft. And this is
Mm,
why I have to be really careful with language when I talk about trauma-informed and restorative approach, which is basically driving human connection and building trust, which will reduce the chances of conflict and disruption. So I tend to use the terms be human and be harmless and be kind.
okay.
Because we need to own the impact that we can have by dehumanizing people. And I'll come back to boundaries of behavior, but I just want to talk about very briefly some case studies where apprentices have been treated in a fairly appalling way in the workplace. And dehumanized in a way. And I am very concerned about the fact that the larger organizations, we don't tend to get those case studies from. So there seems to be an inequality of experience almost,
Mhm.
depending on where you go and your likelihood of being treated more negatively or more poorly, like you just make the tea all day. We've
Mm.
had these stories, you will have heard
Yeah,
them yourself,
yeah.
which is really unacceptable. So I think that when we talk about kindness, it can turn people off. It's such a great shame. So I talk about, can you please be human? And being human is being harmless, so not causing harm. And when we talk about boundaries of behavior, um, being human and being harmless doesn't mean that you don't say to somebody, that's unacceptable. And it doesn't mean that you don't have sanctions. And it doesn't mean that you don't have clear boundaries and clear expectations, which we've already discussed
Hmm.
at length, are not clear. And it doesn't mean that there aren't any consequences. The whole point of restorative approaches is that you are accountable for your behavior and the impact of your behavior. And that in itself has more personal developmental opportunities than if you're simply punished or excluded or rejected. Because you have to go through that quite painful learning sometimes about owning your own behavior and the impact of it. But this comes on both sides. So when we talk about so if I come away from employers for a moment and I take the student who's walked through the door and yet again they haven't brought their ID card, there is a process, there is a policy that needs to be followed, but there is a humane way of saying, you've forgotten your card again, we need to go through this process, and here we go, rather than putting a finger in somebody's face and shouting and having that kind of aggressive challenging, which can trigger young people who have all experienced the pandemic and who have all experienced all of these things that are going on in the world to one degree or another. So I think it's really important that employers and educators can regulate themselves and can maintain a role modeling approach and understand that their behavior, our behavior, can have a real impact. And I just want to, I would like, if I may, just to finish that point with just saying that we are seeing too many cases of misogyny and workplace banter, and sexism and racism in the workplace. And it's quite difficult. I mean, one of the things, and I would challenge you, I'm sure you don't, I'm sure you would agree anyway, but I would challenge you to find one college where a young woman in construction or engineering hasn't been pushed out or hasn't left that area of work due to experiences in the workplace, and that is really not okay. So when and no one would think that that was
No,
okay.
no, yeah, absolutely.
It does appear that when an organisation has an HR or a people and culture department, these issues can be are handled much better. But in many cases, banter is perceived as a joke and acceptable and so on and so on. So when we talk about kindness and we talk about boundaries of behaviour, we've got to think about what behaviours we provoke and what behaviours we promote, because we permit what we promote.
Yeah.
And we need to understand own our own behaviour, as well as focusing on how to put boundaries in to help young people behave in an acceptable way as well. But
Yeah.
that's a joint thing. We've got work to do on both sides.
It's a real challenge because setting those boundaries and that culture of how we work is it's improved in my experience in my lifetime in construction immeasurably.
Yeah.
But we still have such a long way to go. I mean, I interviewed on one of the podcasts that Riley Sweeney, who is a young lady who's won the award for one of the best young managers in the country, and she's an amazing lady, and will probably run World War III quite happily single-handedly. But on
Oh.
winning her award, she was saying that she'd abused a whole load of online abuse. And I just said, why? What relevance? What purpose? What anything? It was, I just couldn't understand where that was coming from. And so, really, those things are probably coming through employers' networks and through employers' IT systems. And we need to make sure the employers are managing those systems effectively so they're not allowing that abuse to happen. But it was a real signpost to me that we as a society or as we as an industry have got a long way to go in solving some of these challenges.
Well, I think misogyny and violence against women and girls is an absolute key issue in our society right now, and we all know that we can see misogyny. You only have to look at the news, and you can see quite misogynistic, very key, powerful people speaking out and influencing. But employers really have to own this in the way that colleges have to own this. It is everywhere, it is insidious, and we must address it. And you're talking about a young woman who has been successful, who has achieved, and who is having those achievements and success celebrated, receiving abuse on the grounds that she's a woman.
Mm.
You know,
Don't ask me to explain it, Polly, because I'm
I'm
sorry.
not going to ask you because there is no explanation. But the fact is that it's getting worse, and this is the impact, of social media and our reliance upon that, and people who sit behind keyboards, doing this kind of very, very damaging stuff, but that really impacts on mental health and well-being, and we've
Yeah.
seen that.
Yeah.
We've absolutely seen that with some key figures saying, right, I'm going to absolutely come away from Facebook or Instagram or WhatsApp or whatever it is, because it's actually having such a catastrophic impact on my mental health. Personally, I think everybody should come away from all of them, but that's not going to happen, is it?
No.
But that's a really good but very, very tragic example of what I'm talking about.
Yeah. So Riley said she'd had some great sponsors and support around her. She's in a large organisation that have helped her through that. But it's not everybody has that luxury and that ability. So it's something we have to address as a society, not least as an industry. I mean, that's where we are. The other question I wanted to ask you, Polly, because one of the things which fascinated me when you spoke at Malton College was your not a hypothesis, but you're telling us that the human brain stops developing only when you're late 20s and early 30s. And actually it's that brain development is something that we have to be aware of, because the consequences of that in terms of learning and ability to learn, I thought was fascinating. And whilst we as employers think, well, you've done education and now you're in the employment area, and this is how you act as an employer, actually the ramifications for that 10 years of employment you might have where your brain is still developing and prone to some of the pressures and changes that you were describing, I thought was absolutely fascinating. I wonder if you could just sort of expound on that a little bit, so that what it might mean for those of us that are mentoring, supporting, employing these youngsters coming through our businesses, and how we might get the best out of them.
Okay, well, that's another podcast all of its own, but I'll do
Oh,
my
I'm sorry.
best. But I have to just correct the language slightly,
Of course, yeah.
because it's your prefrontal cortex which isn't fully developed until maybe mid-20s, even into early 30s, and that's the area of your brain which is your rational decision making, abstract ideas and thought processing part of your brain. So your limbic system, which is your emotional brain, and your brain stem are fully formed when you
Yeah,
went by the
yeah.
age of 16. And what that means is that your emotional brain, for simplicity, is the most dominant voice, because your rational brain is underdeveloped.
Mhm.
And in certain circumstances can go offline. If you're escalated, will go offline. So it's not that so neuroplasticity is the ability to learn new things and develop and evolve, and skill development and so on. And you'll always have I'm a lifelong learner. I learn things all the time.
Mm.
But you have a peak of neuroplasticity, a real opportunity around that in those teenage years, where fascinating things happen to the brain that would take too long to explain now. But happy to have a podcast just on that. But it's a real opportunity for us to influence, and it's where young people are really seeking their identity. They're seeking belonging.
Mhm.
And they want to connect. Human connection is incredibly important. So I think for employers to simply understand that the rational part of the brain is not yet fully developed. So sometimes speaking to it, you're not going to get the response you want, because it's underdeveloped, or potentially it's offline, depending on if there's
Mhm.
been some kind of escalating incident. And the emotional brain, which is the one that also stores memory of trauma, the fight, flight, freeze
Yeah.
responses, um, is the dominant voice. And when we understand that, we can learn how to approach and communicate with young people. And that's not all young people. Many young people have quite very regulated brains,
Mm.
because their emotional brain and their brainstem, if you remember, are in regulation, and they
Yeah.
feel safe emotionally and psychologically, and they feel loved and wanted, and therefore they're in an integrated brain state and can learn more. So that is something that, or the thing that I get most, and I do what you have experienced all over the country in various colleges. And the thing that gets said to me more often than anything else is, why didn't I know this before I started my career in teaching? Why wasn't this explained to me? And I think that your point is absolutely key. Employers should also know this.
Yeah.
We do not understand how our brains work. It's ridiculous. We need to put it right, and then we will change and shift the way, as the staff at Malton College have absolutely said, that they speak to students in a different way, they respond in different ways. You know, that learning is personal development for every single person who accesses it.
Yeah.
And we are all developing all the time, but it's very important to know how the brain works for young people, and the brain development.
I mean, for me, the lesson was that the limbic system, this emotional area, is more exposed to trauma. And if you've had trauma, then you're not regulating that area particularly well. So it's far more difficult for an employer to work on the logical side, which is actually where most of the, if you like, the work-based experiences and decision making needs to happen. And so that lesson, that if we've got people coming through COVID who've had trauma or exposed to some of the issues that we've now been talking and get quite a lot of publicity, that means that we need to provide a really safe environment for people to work in if we're going to get the most out of them, to be able to give them that security of tenure, security of location, if we're going to get the most out of them in terms of educating them, working on them to add to the businesses that they're now engaged in. And I thought that was a really appropriate lesson for us.
I'm just going to add a little
You correct me.
qualification to that.
Yeah.
Because so your brainstem, which is fully formed at birth, is the key to communicating whether there is safety or whether there is threat, risk, and danger. Okay, so that's the bit of your brain that communicates with your limbic system, with your emotional brain, and the brain is made up of memory. So when you have stored trauma, then you can be you can predict, you think you can predict what is going to happen based on what has happened to you previously.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can get that wrong. So you can perceive a threat when there isn't a threat, by the way that somebody else is behaving. And when we do a lot of student voice right across the sector, and what students say to us so often is that they hate sarcasm. And sarcasm, the real meaning of sarcasm is tearing flesh like a dog. We want to really avoid that. So emotional and psychological safety, which is going to make the brainstem not trigger the emotional brain into fight, flight, or freeze, because it's not going to say there's a risk, there's a threat, you're in danger, is not being sarcastic, not humiliating, not embarrassing, being respectful, being human, being harmless, and being kind. And that's in your body language, it's in your tone of voice, and it's in the way that we speak about people. And I'll just finish that little point by saying, when an employer, a colleague in a place of work, or indeed a teacher in education, speaks to a young person in a certain way, it gives permission for everyone else to speak to that person in that way. So you've got one employer who's decided to pick on an apprentice, gives all the other colleagues permission to also pick on that apprentice. And the thing about masking is, when you know that something's happening and it's not right, but it's really important that you feel part of the group and that you belong.
Yeah.
And therefore, you don't actually call things out, even if they are sexist, racist, or, just unkind, simply inhuman, or you're dehumanizing someone in the way you're treating them. And that can lead to significant mental ill health, which leads to dropout. and can, of course, become part of a much more complex picture of mental ill health that can lead young people, sadly, to much more tragic
Yeah,
consequences.
yeah, and it's something that we in the industry are, certainly in construction, acutely aware of, is that we have one of the highest suicide rates of any sector, and it's something that we're not at all proud of, and we're doing great things at the moment to try and solve and sort of mitigate. But it demonstrates the challenges that some of our people are under and the pressures they're under. Polly,
Absolutely.
well aware of the timescale we've taken, and I know you're a very busy lady. Can I just ask one sort of final question, really, just to sum everything up?
Sure.
We've got this goes out to employers, it goes out to construction and in energy sectors, all of whom are desperate to employ good, capable youngsters coming through the sector. Can you give us a sort of couple of parting requests or suggestions or recommendations, or that you would sort of call to arms that you might ask them to do to get the best out of their people?
Oh, well, I think it's really important to get the best out of your workforce, and I would say, employers, please invest your time in working with education providers. Meet them, talk to them, work collaboratively with them. You're going to get the best out of your apprentices, the best out of your workforce. It's going to be a win-win for everybody when we really effectively bridge together.
Mhm.
But understand the value of further education colleges.
Yeah.
I think the second thing, if I have my wand waving, which is essential, is to understand, reflecting on what we've just said, understand the damage that misogyny, sexism, racism, and casual banter can have in the workplace and on individuals. And we need, and I know there's a lot of courage in the industry, and I know that you're being very brave in facing some of that. We are all being
Mm.
courageous and brave in facing the more difficult areas of our work, but we need to get more women into these industries, and we need to really make sure that they are emotionally, psychologically safe places for women to work, as well as young men, as well
Yeah.
as LGBTQ apprentices, as well as apprentices from different cultures. We really need to understand a trauma-informed and restorative approach. And and that might sound like a big ask, but it's not, because a 90-minute session at Malton College made a massive
Oh, it
difference.
did. Yeah, yeah.
And so don't think that, this is really just about understanding. And I think we've said enough about that for this one.
Mm.
And I think lastly, I would say, we talk about resilience a lot. I'm very circumspect about you need to be more resilient in a world which is not very nice to be in sometimes. But I would say to employers, don't give up on apprentices who make mistakes. Don't give up on colleges who have difficulties with recruitment of staff. Let's find some tolerance, let's find some generosity, invest in local talent, and stick with it. And let's see, sometimes the very best employees are the ones that you to begin with thought really weren't worth
Mhm.
the time and effort. And when you do show that you believe in somebody, and you invest that time and effort, you produce great riches. So I would say that.
Yeah, no, and that chimes, all three chimed with me, and so I think it's an excellent positive note to finish on. But Polly, thank you very much indeed for your time today. It's been a fascinating canter through everything. As you say, opportunities for podcast galore on all the stuff that we've been producing, but perhaps we'll leave those for another day. But I think it's been a huge. I think there's lots of really good lessons there that we need to draw out for the industry and for employers. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mark. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you.